in Washington. Federal investigators subpoenaed Miller months ago, and his testimony is related to the former president's efforts to undermine the transfer of power after his loss to Joe Biden in 2020. Joining us now to discuss is federal defense attorney Ronald Chapman. Ronald, thanks so much for joining us. A lot of developments this week. What stands out to you as being perhaps the most consequential or important?
Well, certainly we've received word from sources that there's going to be potentially 5 criminal referrals coming out of the January 6th committee. Obviously, one of them might be Donald Trump. We may also see one of Meadows, Clark, potentially Giuliani, and then Eastman, the lawyer. I think in terms of charges coming out of these referrals, we may see contempt charges. We may also see conspiracy and insurrection charges like we saw indictments of some January 6th actual rioters. Certainly very significant developments are going to happen this Sunday when the report is released.
So the House Select Committee making criminal referrals is, of course, not the same as charges actually being brought. So what are the next steps once the panel makes those referrals to the DOJ?
Well, yeah, these referrals are going to be largely symbolic. Ultimately, the Department of Justice is charged with the authority on whether or not they actually indict some of these members. That being said, the evidence that was generated from the January 6th committee, the subpoenas that were issued, the responses that were required, and given this was an actual congressional hearing where contempt can be authorized, that certainly could fuel the Department of Justice to take some form of action here. But it will ultimately be up to the special prosecutor assigned and the Attorney General to determine if charges are filed.
And what do you make of Special Counsel Jack Smith's handling of the Trump investigations? The former president has attacked him and referred to him as a, quote, political hitman. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, certainly he is quite an unimpeachable prosecutor. It seemed like when selecting him, they chose somebody who rode straight down the middle, was a career prosecutor, and seems to have had a wonderful job their entire career. I don't think this looks like a hit job from at least my perspective. He moves quick. He has a very good track record, and he's already moving quick in this case. We've already seen that there's been some subpoenas for Trump communications, grand jury subpoenas, which is a very significant development, given that we can tell that there has been an actual grand jury convened now in the course of this investigation.
So do you think that former President Trump is actually in serious legal trouble here? Because we have seen similar scenarios before. Do you think these investigations are any different? And if so, why?
And that's actually the question here. I mean, at the end of the day, what would have to happen is for a grand jury to reach an indictment against Donald Trump. Certainly that's possible. The old adage is that you can indict a ham sandwich. I'm sure a prosecutor could get it. But at the end of the day, a prosecutor needs to determine whether or not they could prove this to a jury. And while they may be able to satisfy most of the elements in the crime, I've got to imagine that there's going to be 1, 2, 3 jurors sitting in that box who won't buy anything that a prosecutor has to say about this because of political affiliations. I think we're going to see investigations. It's possible we may see an indictment, but the really difficult thing that Merrick Garland's going to have to sit down and decide is whether or not he thinks he can convince a jury. Because an acquittal of Donald Trump, if the Department of Justice tries to move, leaves egg on a lot of people's faces, and I'm sure that's not what they want.
Federal defense attorney Ronald Chapman, thanks so much for your time tonight.
Thank you.